I've decided to fabricate two exhaust shield parts from scratch that I didn't have. I intend to make one of these. I'm going to cut out that shape out of similar gauge material, and I'll weld on a boss like that and a nut on the back at that end. I've marked out on this piece of scrap the pattern. That hole there, the larger hole, it's not exactly the same, but it's really just a clearance hole, and I've tried to utilise one that was existing in this piece of scrap already, like similar to the one up that end. So I'm going to cut the outline of that out. I'm hoping to be able to do that in my vertical bandsaw with a bimetal blade. Haven't really got slow enough band speed happening, but we'll see how we go. I've bolted the good part to the piece I need to shape there, and I've cut, you can see how rough it is there where the bandsaw won't go internal corners. I'll sand that on the linisher now to bring those two parts very similar in shape. Well, there's the part without the nuts welded on the back or the spacer welded on the front here. That hole there is just for getting to a nut in the back there that bolts the back shield. So although that hole's not accurately, it's slightly bigger than the other one, and it provides the clearance needed to get a socket in to get to the other screw at the back there. So that's fine, and making a hole like that in thin metal is more difficult than cutting out a profile on the outside of a shape. So I need to weld a standard nut on the back up here and turn up a larger spacer like this one's got for this end. There's the captive nut on the back for that end. There's the spacer. The spacer goes on the front here. Captive nut goes on the back there. But the spacing of these two holes has worked out fine. I drilled those holes 6.3 or 1/4 inch rather than 6 mil to give that a little bit of come and go. As it turned out, I think I was more accurate than that anyway. So this is probably the easy part. Making that front cover is going to be a whole lot harder, I'm guessing. The next thing to do when I'm fabricating this plate is to make this boss. Now, I've just found that piece of material in my scrap bin. It already has a 5mm hole through it, so 5mm is already the tapping size for 6mm. It's slightly smaller diameter. I don't think that's critical at all, and it needs to be shortened up just a fraction. So I'm going to whack that in the lathe, machine that down to the same length as this piece, and tap it out 6mm so that it's ready to weld on to my plate. And then I've got to weld a nut on this end, which is easy. That's what's required to finish off my copy of this plate. So I'm getting ready to weld this. This one's got weld around there and a bit on the outside there, and the nut on the back has 4 little dabs around the outside. Mine, the boss is slightly smaller diameter. It's held on there currently with that bolt. I should be able to get a dab in there and a dab on the outside there. And this end, I've got that nut sitting there. I should get a few dabs, maybe 3 of them, around the peripheral of that little nut, and that should retain it adequately. So this is my bracket, and the one I copied at the back there. put a bit of time into making that nice, and it's come out pretty good. It's not exactly the same, but functionally the same. Probably needs a shot of paint to stop it rusting. The other one's plated. This one is not plated and needs some paint to protect it. So this here is a heat shield that I have copied from this one off my 1990 bike. It's a complex shape, and I have hammered that out of a flat sheet of metal that I found here. That's it fitted in there with the bracket I've made supporting the bottom of it, and all the correct screws in place. I started making this piece of exhaust by making up a wooden block cut out roughly to the profile of the piece I was wanting to copy, so that I could start hammering a flat sheet to that sort of compound shape. Pattern doesn't sit flat on this wood, but it was a start to get the edge rolled over to that curve along the edge. That's where I started, with a flat sheet. My piece was hammered to that wooden block, and then various other features incorporated into it. Little bumps on the top there, there's 3 of those, and I made up a die or a punch that located in those holes. I drilled some holes across the top of my piece and then used this punch to locate in those holes and to raise that section with a sort of rounded end on it, similar to the original. The piece that didn't work out was this dent in the side, which is really to create clearance for the recoil starter handle. But otherwise I'm reasonably happy. It screws into place. There's a whole lot of panel beating involved in beating that out. The piece of original equipment was a piece of powder coated cabinet that I cut out mainly on the bandsaw. I need to remove the rest of that powder coating just to so the paint will stick. I've bought some silver galv paint that I will paint this with. I also want to paint up that bracket that I fabricated that picks up the lower mounts of this same bracket. Quite a lot of work, a whole day's worth to knock that out, and a little bit more now to paint it, and to I've got the bike apart again, centre bracket undone, exhaust off. I haven't had to remove this time. I can't get that end cap out with the shocker in place. I'd need to remove the shocker. Potentially we'll do that just to put some silver paint on that to keep it all the same. I'm a little bit obsessive on this, but it's been an interesting exercise. I've never panel beated a flat sheet of metal into anything so complicated in the past. Usually my panel beating consists of straightening out a bash plate or something. I managed to burn a hole in it here when I was welding that captive nut on the back. It actually sits up behind the bracket and you don't see it, and I was only going to make it worse if I tried to fix that, so I left it. A bit disappointed in that, but that's how things turn out sometimes. The original clamp for here was buggered and I couldn't be bothered making another one. I've bought 2 stainless steel hose clamps, 2 of them because one of them's probably weak. Look, that joint hasn't leaked the whole time I've been playing with the bike, so the cover that goes on there has got that sort of bump on the side of it that normally goes over the big ugly clamp that normally fits in that location. I don't think I've filmed the bracket that goes on the back there. It comes off this bolt here and goes through that hole in the back of this. So that cover sort of fits on there okay. This bolt hole here goes through, and there's a captive nut on this piece that the bolt goes through there, through that back cover, through this bracket and into the piece behind there, and that piece behind's got to move down a bit to line that bolt up. These two bolts go into that other bracket that's in behind there that I fabricated. This is now painted with a silver zinc paint. I've been using black zinc on the rest of the frame in the past. Went to buy some this morning and they didn't have any. I thought, well, I'll put some silver zinc on these components. It will be interesting how the heat affects it, but we'll know soon enough, I suppose. Not too concerned about it. After fabricating this, I needed to have all of this stuff out of the way again. The shocker's leaning out at the moment because I can't get that piece off with the shocker in place. Getting down to the final assembly, got to put the recoil starter on. You can see this section here is where they have a relief in the side of it and a dent in the top, because that's where the handle for the recoil starter tends to sit. Goes up behind that cable. Well, that's it for the first time with all of the screws in place and painted up. I can now put this shocker back, the recoil starter on. So I decided to fix this shield after I made a whole video about just putting the back piece in. I was buttoning it up and I thought, well, I've still got to put a wheel on. I was working on this side. I did the thematic fan. It really should come off again and get another shot of paint. But boy, this has looked a hell of a lot better now that I've fabricated this part and that part. Pretty happy with that. It's always good to try new stuff, so get out to your shed and have some fun.